Okay, so I've got a very rough massing model there, and I've done another one obviously for this building just to show you some basic approaches to massing when you're working from a ground plane. And so obviously you have the massing and site tab where you can get to the massing tools, but I wanted to show you as well that you can always make a massing family if you go to the main menu and then choose new and then family, or you can go straight to conceptual mass. If you go to family by mistake, then you can always just browse to the conceptual mass folder and choose metric mass, but choosing new and then conceptual mass will just take you straight there. And so when you make a massing family, you have exactly the same tools as when you go to in-place mass, but the interface is a little bit different. Just the way that things show, particularly in 3D views, is probably a little bit better for massing. So I want to have some sloping geometry, and I'm going to have that geometry probably repeated a couple of times, so it's going to make sense to have that done with a family. And so I'm going to make I'll make it interesting. I'm going to do an ellipse on the ground plane. And make sure you realise whenever you use these drawing tools, you've got two different options to choose the plane that you're drawing on. You can either use draw on face or draw on work plane. So in this case, it won't make much difference either way because I've only got the one plane there. But later on when there's more geometry, if you leave it on draw on face, you can accidentally pick surfaces that maybe you don't want to. So just to be sure, it's probably not a bad idea to go to draw on work plane, to begin with, and then have a look at the plane that's been selected there. I'm just going to draw an ellipse, and I don't want to make it too big. Make sure you realise as well when you're working with massing, it's set up for a very large scale. So notice down here it's 1 to 200, and that's why the line weights are so heavy. So I'll just make this fairly small. I want it to be not much bigger than a column. So it looks like that. And a good trick when you want to make the line weights lighter, you can of course use thin lines, but the scale is the reason the line weight is the weight it is. So if you go to a lighter or a bigger scale, then the line weight's going to become lighter. And so I'll just show you that in a 3D view now. I can see my little ellipse, but again, because it's 1 to 200, it's just a blob. If I go to 1 to 20, then I'll see the lines really clearly. And so now this is where things get interesting. If I go to an elevation view, then again I'm going to change the scale and I can see my little shape on the ground. So now I'm going to draw a plane using the tools over here. You can see if you choose one of these shapes, it just defaults to the model option, which is giving you model lines. But then you have reference, but that's not reference planes. That's going to give you reference lines. And funnily enough, reference lines are actually more complicated than reference planes. So a reference plane is just a flat surface. A reference line is actually made up of several reference planes. It's one of those funny terminologies in Revit. They're very useful though, reference lines. I don't want one in this case, so I'm just going to use plane to make a reference plane, and I'm going to draw it at an angle. Okay, so I just want to measure from there, make sure I've got enough height. I'll make that a bit higher. Okay, so I've drawn a plane at an angle, and now I can select that plane, and like any reference plane in Revit, you can give it a name, and that's a really important procedure. So if you're not doing that with your reference planes, when you start modelling, you need to be able to do that. So again, you need to select the reference plane, and then in Properties, go to the name field there, and I'm just going to call this sloping top. I can see the name there, you can see it over here. I'm going to go back to my plan view now, and then I'm going to draw another ellipse. But this time, I'm going to choose my new reference plane from the drop-down list there. going to click roughly in the same point and maybe just bring it out. So I might move that to one side. So if I look at that in 3D now, you can see I've got two shapes, different angles. So if I go back to the elevation, if I move that plane, the shape is hosted by it, so the plane will go with it. So that's actually all I want. And often you can get, I think, interesting forms using fairly simple geometry. This is something, though, that you could not do with the regular modelling tools with Revit. I want to blend these two shapes, and the limitation with the blend tool normally is that the shapes need to be parallel. But I've got the second one at an angle, so I can just choose these two shapes, and using that Create Form tool, well, let's just go back to basics. If I only select one shape and then click Create Form, it'll extrude it. Bring it up. If I instead select, just going to show you a few other things. I'm going to draw a line over to one side. So if I select that shape and then a straight line, using Control to select both of them, and then go to Create Form, it'll do a revolve. Okay, so it knows when you select those two different kinds of geometry, a closed shape, or really any shape, and then a straight line, it will know that you want to revolve. You might be thinking, well, what happens if I select two lines? The answer is it'll ask you. So if I do, I'll just show you. So if I select two lines here, notice how there are a few different possibilities. So it gives you a choice. So I think in some ways they tried to be a bit too clever by half when they came up with this modelling system, because essentially you can get all of the modelling operations, extrusion, blend, revolve, swept blend, just by selecting different combinations of shapes. But, and you can actually do a lot more than you can do with those modelling tools, but you need to kind of know in advance what shapes you need to get to those different final outcomes. But once you've experimented with a little bit, you'll see it's fairly straightforward. If I select these two shapes, Create Form, it knows to do a blend. Now, it's also quite difficult to change the shapes after you've turned them into a form, just because you have so many other options. You can definitely go back and change the original shapes, but it's not as easy as it is with the regular modelling tools. So it's good to try and get the shapes close to what you're after. But I thought maybe I'll just show you how far you can take this. If I do another plane in this view, and I'll maybe just do something kind of random over here. I don't really want this shape, I just want to show you what's possible. So we'll call this top, and then back into my plan view, and I'll draw, just keep it simple actually, I'll just draw a circle, and now I can choose top, and just draw a circle somewhere. So notice how it looks like an ellipse, because that plane is at an angle to the ground. So this is something now, when you see this shape, you just could not do this with the regular modelling tools. So if I select those three shapes, Create Form, and get this sort of interesting geometry. And again, I can bring these closer together maybe and change. So this way, it's possible to make what's called a loft. So a lofted form is something that most 3D modelling programs can create. And of course Revit can, like I'm showing you, but it's just done maybe a bit differently with Revit than it is in programs like AutoCAD and 3ds Max. Okay, so lots of different things you can do. But like I was saying, it doesn't need to be complicated, it doesn't have to be. And so I'm going to go back just with these two tools, these two shapes, Create Form, that's pretty much what I'm after. And so we'll save that as a family. So and so I can place these around just like any other family. Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I'll do next. Yeah. So I might put a few of these in. So there, in my 3D view, I can see these objects, and then on the Massing and Site tab, using the wall option there, I'm just going to choose a simple wall. So I'm going to go generic 100 mil, and then I can choose any of these surfaces and make those walls. And that means they'll read correctly in the plan. They're not just a big solid 3D blob. Only massing. Yeah. Okay, so they're all selected. And then what I think is really interesting is I might realise, well, actually, they're not quite big enough. I'm not sure. They're just kind of decorative, really, at the moment. But yeah, maybe. No, I'm not going to keep that shuttle just there as a reference. I don't think I'll even. Oh yeah, exactly. So now I can go back to that massing and adjust it. So I might bring this up and then just stretch that surface up to align with it, or you can just use the align tool. Exactly, yeah. So I'll yeah, well, I've got to load it back in, and that's the good thing about families. You can have that file saved, and then you choose whether or not to load that change into a particular project. It's not automatically linked. Yeah, yeah. You can have several versions of it, and you know, you might not want it to update what you've done in a project. But here I do, so I'm going to say overwrite the existing version. My massing's changed, so now I can just select all of those walls, and yeah, well, it just tells you you've got the option. Oh, just with control. And then it gives you the option when it's changed, it'll give you this option here, update to face. That's it. So with the massing in a family file, you get all those different options, and they're mainly graphical. So in other words, the way it shows in the 3D view especially. But again, if you use model in place, and I'll just call this it's going to be shell mass 2 or something. So yeah. Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'll just do a little bit more of that just to show you some of the other options. So with a base shape, so I'll just draw something again here, and looking at the plane, making sure I'm drawing on the ground floor. Just come around here and trying to keep it fairly simple. So I can go and use curves and draw arcs as well as straight lines. So I was showing you before you can use a combination of shapes, but sometimes it's easier to start with a single shape, which is what I'm going to do here. Okay, that'll do. So I've got another shape on the ground, and now I can select that, create form, and it's just going to extrude it. That is a mass. So yeah, yeah. So with massing, when you draw a shape, it's automatically connected. So it's a little bit different to the way you draw things when you're making an extrusion. You get all the same drawing tools, but notice how if I click on one of the lines, it's selecting the whole thing. So it knows that it's connected, and that takes a bit of getting used to, but it's pretty handy. And then with create form, it'll bring that up. And so instead of getting the changes I want by combining all of these shapes, now I can go to maybe, well, I'll start by just scaling the top surface there. So I'm going to bring that down to make it smaller. So that's similar to what you get with a blend, but I'm doing it in a different way. And then I can get just a corner, move that down. Yeah, doing it at an angle. I could have, but it's a bit more work. Yeah. Yeah. And there's just different ways. It often is to do with the way you come up with the design. And so lots of different ways of getting to the same result. And so here I can get any of these corner points, and you can see just to remind you, when you get the different coloured arrows, orange means it's following the edge that it's projecting from, but red, green and blue mean X, Y and Z. So the green one there is Z, is Y, the blue is Z. I don't have a red, but if I press space, then it goes to X, Y, Z. So you can just toggle with space, and I'll get another one maybe where it's going to have, there we go. So that one you can see, it's a bit confusing because we've got the two orange arrows, but with space it'll always go to X, Y, Z. So if you've done those things in 3ds Max, moving vertices and things like that around, this should be fairly straightforward. And so again, I can just bring this down and do whatever I want. So so I showed you that last week, but I just thought I'd go over that quickly again. And then one other thing, if you select any mass, you'll notice first I've been selecting individual points, edges and vertices on the corners. You can try pressing tab to get different options. So there, pressing tab, it goes to the whole form, then to the edge, then to one surface, then it should go to the other surface. There it is, so it goes to that surface. Bring that out. So it's really similar to editable polys in 3ds Max, where you have vertices, edges, faces, and then the whole element. And so to see those things a bit more clearly, you have this X-ray option. That'll make it see-through, and you can see the vertices or the vertexes, each vertex point really clearly. And then you can use these other options to either add edges, so you can divide up your surfaces more. You can also use it to draw edges between, so I can draw, say, well, I'll just do one, so you can do them definitely as straight lines, or you can do them as diagonals, like that. Yeah, it's an amazing tool, and they're developing it even further. There's a new modelling approach that's coming through over the next few years. But yeah, lots of things you can do with it. So here you can see I can put lots of different edges in, and then again selecting that, you've got add profile. So you can use that to add in all kind of, yeah. So this just gives you more divisions. Floors is another thing as well, but you can do that too. So yeah, so I'll just put in a couple of profiles there. And profiles are interesting because when you move those vertices now, they're going to use a spline. So I'm going to get that kind of curving path through those points. It can be a bit hard to control, but it can give you some really interesting things as well. So lots of things you can do. And then I'll just select it and then turn X-ray off, so it's back to being solid. So I don't need to use all of that. I can just use the parts that I think are working. So if I go to Finish Mass, I'm going to select it, You go to mass floors and just choose the levels that I want to go through it. We'll put those floor plates in, and you know, sometimes you might just say, oh, well, I just want the floors, so I'll just start with that. Go back to massing and site. You've got the floor tool there, so I'll just choose those surfaces, create floor. And so on that massing and site tab, the toggle there at the beginning basically hides all of the massing, so you can then just see the physical objects, the things that are actually going to be built. And so then I can say, well, actually I want to maybe turn some of these into walls. So back to the wall tool, and I'll just use some simple walls for some parts of it, maybe here and here. Maybe there. Over here. Don't know how that's going to work, but we'll see. Maybe there. So again, you can toggle the massing. They can do really interesting things. And then final thing is, well, you've got curtain systems as well. So you can make curtain walls out of any of these surfaces. And they can, of course, have mullions and everything else. If you just go into your type properties, usually just add in, I'll just do a quick interior mullions. And then you can put a roof as well, using any of those surfaces. So all your main Revit objects you can make from massing. You can't do ceilings, unfortunately, so you have to model them manually. But you can do that. You can definitely model ceilings, almost any shape you need. Okay, it doesn't like that. So yeah, some roof shapes it doesn't like. But if that happens, you can just use walls. Or try and do them in sections. So if I do this one and then create roof, yeah, it's okay with that. So I can do them in pieces as well, and that would work. Okay, so lots of things you can do that you just can't make with the regular modelling tools. And so, you know, hopefully it'll open up some possibilities with your modelling. And even if you're doing very simple block forms, it can be useful just to plan things out in a 3D volumetric way, because you can then turn them into walls and floors pretty quickly. Oh, a helix? Yeah, okay, so they've... Yeah, okay, so they've got a couple of options. You've got the ramp tool will give you a spiralling floor, and that can be really useful for those kinds of floors. You can try using massing, because you have the there is a tool. What am I thinking of? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So, sorry. What you'd have to do is make points and set them to different heights, and then do a 3D spline. So you've got here the 3D spline tool here, which will create a 3D spline, obviously, but it generally works better if it's got points to snap to. And so that way you can try to model the form. If all of the geometry is based on a helix, so in other words a spiral that's rising, then I'd think seriously about using 3ds Max to do the modelling. And another option that I haven't shown you is that you can bring a 3ds Max model into a massing family, like the one I just showed you, and then that'll work just like any other mass. So then you can bring that geometry into your project file as a massing family, even though it's all been modelled in Max, and you can pick those surfaces and turn them into floors and walls and other things. Okay, there's a few tricks. So you've got there's a few different formats that have different advantages. So you can use the DWG format. Generally, that works pretty well. but it just won't cope with some geometry. So if it doesn't, if you tried, DWG first, let me know if it's not working for your geometry, and then I can show you a couple of other formats that will sometimes work a bit better. But DWGs work pretty well because AutoCAD format's a pretty strong all-round 3D format. So that's possibly the way to do it. But again, just try to maybe, even before you do that, rough out the plan in Revit. And if you can do things like ramps for a lot of the floor surfaces, then that might solve the problem. Depends how complex your helix shapes are. And then you do also have the option when you're making floors. Show you one other little thing. This is almost like massing. A lot of people don't know you've got it in Revit. So when you make a floor, I'll start just with a straight one, so you can see basically how it works. You've got the option there to go modify sub-elements. And then you can change the height of any point on the floor. So that way you can get sloping floors. Yep, I'll put it. And then if you have curves, so if you make a floor that has a curve, it's a little bit different to the way a ramp works, but it can be helpful if you've got a design based on some sort of helical shape, because you can still attach walls to it. So I'll make this have a bit more of a slope. You can also do the edge as well. That can be interesting, but with the design you're probably thinking of, well, actually you could do this whole edge, so you could make that 2000. So I've got there a sloping curve, which is pretty close to what you would get with a ramp, exactly, a curving ramp. And then, yeah, well that, and also if you do a floor and you need that to interact with your ramp, why can't I see it here? Let's see where that's gone. Sorry, I've just put that somewhere. I think I've popped. Oh, that's my ceiling plan, no wonder. Okay, so there it is. Okay, so if I do a wall over that, then with any luck, I can have that wall. I might just move it over a bit so it's completely, yeah. So I can have that wall attached to the floor. It doesn't like it. So, let's try the base. So there, that's on top. I can go to base, and then let's try that again. Yep, that's worked. So that can be helpful when you have surfaces like that. So you don't need to use massing to get all the geometry, and if it's regular geometry based on, standard Euclidean geometry, arcs, lines, rectangles, all of those essential geometric forms, it can be easy just to model it with the normal tools. But it's good to know that you've got massing. Yes, yeah, of course, that's what I'm here for. So.